mindset is certainly for me, and in my own experience, I found that the shift in mindset was some of the key points in my journey where I can point to and say, that's when everything changed. That was the catalyst to change, to action, to seeing more results with my business, with just generally becoming a more well-rounded entrepreneur.
And also we'll have specific actionable advice for everyone listening in today that you can take on board so that you can change your mindset around growing a business and gain as much success as you desire.
If you're going to let the fear of failure hold you back from starting because you're so afraid of the potential risks, then you'll never do anything.
You've got to take risks in business. There's always going to be an element of a risk, but make sure you mitigate that risk and make a calculated risk as much as you can.
I think failures are part of entrepreneurship. You have to come to terms with failing, and failing quickly, or failing forwards, as they say.
It's easy to pick up on that and start having limiting beliefs that then negatively impact your ability to think big and act big to achieve the big goals that we have.
I didn't used to view it as an essential until I found out the hard way. Welcome to the Dropship Unlocked podcast, where we unlock the secrets to high-ticket dropshipping and achieving financial freedom. I'm Lewis Smith, founder of Dropship Unlocked, and I'm joined by James Erdley, client success coach at Dropship Unlocked. Each episode, we'll be sharing our experiences and providing you with the tools you need to build a successful e-commerce empire of your own. From zero to owning £1 million online business, we'll help you achieve the ultimate freedom over your time, location, and financial future. And when we're not recording the podcast episodes or running our own e-commerce businesses, you'll find us helping people like you launch their own high-ticket dropshipping businesses. To learn more about working with us, head over to dropshipunlocked.com/free. Now sit back, relax, and get ready to access your full potential with the Dropship Unlocked podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dropship Unlocked podcast. So a very exciting episode that we've got today. It's all about the mindset that you need to have, and perhaps a shift in mindset that you need to have if you're an employee at the moment, to have an entrepreneur mindset so that you can really gain success from growing your own business. So before we start, we've put together some 7 simple steps for you to follow. So 7 mindset shifts for you to put in place. But first, Lewis, we're going to talk about the importance of really having a different mindset and how it differs from an employee mindset from an entrepreneur's mindset. So how important do you think it is for people to gain an entrepreneurial sort of mindset before they start?
Yeah, I think mindset is critical, certainly for me, and in my own experience, I found that the shift in mindset was some of the key points in my journey where I can point to and say, that's when everything changed. That was the catalyst to change, to action, to seeing more results with my business, with, just generally becoming a more well-rounded entrepreneur. So I think that the mindset really is the foundations for setting myself up for success. And so if you can replicate some of the things that we're talking about in today's episode, then I think you'll be in a really good place. And it's also about obviously preparing yourself for setbacks and making sure that as you do grow into achieving the next stage of success, that you don't feel like you're an imposter. You don't feel like you're not worthy of that success because you believed that you would achieve it all along. So there's a lot to it, and we'll dive into it in today's episode, I'm sure.
Completely agree. I'm really excited to dive in. We'll have some stories about the different mindsets that we've had from before in the old days to how we are now. And also we'll have specific actionable advice for everyone listening in today that you can take on board so that you can change your mindset around growing a business and gain as much success as you desire. So Lewis, first let's go into a bit of a story and to illustrate the importance of your mindset. Can you tell us about a specific time where you had to make a mindset shift in order to overcome an obstacle in your own entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so I think that my old view of entrepreneurs and business owners before I was in this world, before I really understood what one was or what they did, was that I used to see a business owner as this stereotype of a really stressed out person who was sleep deprived, who had so many things going on, and they didn't look like they had a particularly happy life, to be honest, the way I viewed it. Or there was the other end of the spectrum, which were people like the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Richard Bransons, the people who are the elite unicorns of their industries, who were living this amazing, incredible billionaire life as entrepreneurs. But I didn't really see anything in between. So I used to view it as quite polarizing. And another thing is I used to view it as quite high risk. And I used to think that there's a very low probability of someone like me succeeding in entrepreneurship because why would I succeed? I'd be fighting an uphill battle. Why would anyone want to buy from me? There's plenty of people out there and competitors that would invest so much more time and money and skill, and they have better teams than I could ever have. Like, why would they want to buy from me? There's so much competition out there. All the good markets have probably snapped up. All the good opportunities have probably been taken. And I think that fear of competing, that fear of potential failure was holding me back from progressing. So I was just stuck in a rut. I didn't really at that point think that the entrepreneurship path was one that I would take. And it wasn't until, and I talked about this in a previous episode when I was reading The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, that hearing about some of his setbacks and failures on his journey, and he talked about an e-commerce brand that he had launched, which was kind of designed as a lifestyle business. And it was like he wasn't the next, Facebook founder, but he also didn't seem to be super stressed. He was like, he'd built this lifestyle business, this muse, as he calls it. And I think that for me shifted my mindset. And I realized, there is an in-between here. There is something where you can do incredibly well for yourself, but you might not be globally recognized as the next incredible unicorn entrepreneur, software company founder. And I think it was just hearing his persistence and how he learned and viewed the challenges that he faced and the obstacles that he faced as projects to try to overcome, that it inspired me. And I decided that, hang on a sec, if I embrace risk taking, if I can learn from my failures and kind of gamify the whole process, then I can do it. So I did. I dived into e-commerce and of course made loads of mistakes along the way. I faced loads of challenges, but I kept learning and I kept adapting, and eventually got to the point where I'd made enough mistakes that the business could start to take off. And obviously once you've made those mistakes, you don't tend to repeat them because you kind of, they hurt right from the first time. So you remember them and you can navigate your road to having a successful business without repeating those same mistakes. And so I think for me, it was the mindset shift that yes, it is okay to take risks. And yes, I shouldn't be afraid of failure. That's part of the journey. That was one of the biggest pivotal moments for me that shifted my approach towards entrepreneurship.
I think we are so fortunate to have the wisdom that we can access for very low cost with books and podcasts and YouTube videos, like the 4-Hour Workweek that you mentioned, to give us an idea of the different mindset that some people have around success, business or failure. And if we take that on board, then you can really think differently about the way you approach a new business. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with this podcast episode today. So bringing about these different mindset shifts that we'll go through and we've identified. If you really think about this and take this on board, it can really impact the way you go into business and impact the success that you have. So it's really interesting to hear, Lewis, about the change in mindset you had after you came across the 4-Hour Workweek, which is so influential to so many people. So the first mindset shift that we've noted, okay, it's all about risk taking and having a certain attitude to risk and how that can affect your successes or failures. So how would you say from your entrepreneurial journey, how would your attitude to risk have adapted, and what would you suggest is the best attitude to have towards risks for new entrepreneurs?
Yeah, being willing to take calculated risks is an important attribute for an entrepreneur, I believe, and it certainly has been for me. I think if you're going to let the fear of failure hold you back from starting because you're so afraid of the potential risks, then you'll never do anything. You'll just be stuck in this holding pattern. So it reminds me when I was first getting started and I was late up one evening and I was doing some market research around kind of which industries that I wanted to build my first e-commerce business in. And I was looking at a potential niche market, kind of an industry, and it was highly competitive. And the old me would have probably thought, well, again, why would I succeed in a market like that? There are plenty of people that have been in that market for years. Why would I have any chance? And I think I asked around and I looked at some forums online for is it worth starting a business in this market? So use the example of barbecues, for example. Should I launch a barbecue retailer? That's the example we always go to. And online, you can imagine people are like, no, absolutely, that industry's crowded already. It's so competitive. You'd never be able to do it. There's global brands spending millions of pounds on their marketing budgets. Why would you? And it would have been the same if I'd asked friends and family, thinking of launching a barbecue retailer, that have been okay, all right, come back to us, when you've failed. But no, I decided that I could take a calculated risk. I'd done extensive research in the first industry that I wanted to go into, and I'd created a unique value proposition that would differentiate our brand from the other retailers in that industry. And as we went along, of course, we faced obstacles. Of course, there were issues with gaining the trust of suppliers or finding the right customers at the right cost per acquisition for a customer and trying to carve out our space in that market from all of the competitors in there. But over time, we stayed committed, we learned from our experience. And over time, as we fine-tuned some of the strategies and really focused in on providing top quality customer service, we managed to start to see the results of taking those early calculated risks compound. And then eventually, your tolerance to risks builds up because you've got like a buffer, you have a safety net, you have money in the bank, you have a team, and you can say, oh, we're going to take a risk here and we're going to launch, you'll go into a slightly different industry because we can back it if it goes wrong. When you're first starting out, I think unless you have a very clear step-by-step path to get you to the point where you want to get to, the risk is that you make a mistake that you may not recover from. So that's why I'm such a big advocate for like mentorship and training, because without that, you are effectively navigating blind, and the risk is that, yeah, you might make a mistake you can't recover from financially. Now, I think that's an extreme example, but that's kind of why we have the step-by-step plan to get up and running now.
Yeah, I think risk is an interesting one because there's always going to be some risk involved with starting a business. But what we can do is mitigate that risk so that the way we take on risks is that they are calculated. There's always a chance of failure, but we know that we've taken on enough advice or we've followed the right training program so we can mitigate that and improve our chance of success. So for me, when I started in e-commerce, in the e-commerce world, I wanted to take a risk. I wanted to start a business. When I first started, I didn't do as much calculation of the risk as I should have done, because I just was so keen to start that I found the first model that looked good on YouTube, and it was to sell low ticket items from China, which I've talked about before. And the specific product that I sold, because I've sold a few, was these no tie shoelaces. Okay, so think about they're shoelaces, but they're elasticated. You don't need to tie them up because there's a little clip that you clip together, and it saves you the time of the 10 seconds that it takes you to tie your laces. So a genius invention, of course. But I was trying to sell these from China for £10-15 with a little YouTube, with a little Facebook ad. And actually, in truth, it was probably one of the first products that I saw that I knew I could dropship and find at a very cheap price. And straight away, I went into it and took that risk and started spending money on ads to try and sell these. I didn't do any of the validation criteria that I would do now to find out if there's demand, to find out if people are actually searching for this type of product. And so inevitably it was a failure because I spent far too much money on ads and there wasn't the demand there to justify the money that I had spent on to sell these products. So I learned from that. You've got to take risks in business. There's always going to be an element of a risk, but make sure you mitigate that risk and make a calculated risk as much as you can. So yeah, great point, Lewis. Completely agree with that one. Moving on to another mindset shift that we think people that should have, it's crucial, is similar to what I've just mentioned, is about embracing failures. So having a certain attitude to failures. So how can embracing failures help us become better entrepreneurs?
I think failures are part of entrepreneurship. You have to come to terms with failing, and failing quickly, or failing forwards, as they say. I think you have to use those failures and embrace them and learn from them and use them to improve your business and make sure that you can avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. When I started out and I initially entered into the world of e-commerce and I launched, I think an initial store and then another store afterwards, and I was making quick mistakes, right? I was failing quickly. And the first store was it was before I used the Home Turf Advantage model, which we now use, but I was selling low price items like luxury candles, right? So using beeswax, and it was like kind of this eco beeswax candle thing. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not a market that you can succeed in. Absolutely is. It doesn't use the model that we use now. And the margins were just very, very slim. And there were all kinds of issues with that in terms of supply, and the cost of goods was very high, and it had to be a real strong brand and value proposition around that and differentiation from other brands. And then I also launched another store, and that was in selling men's fashion accessories, so things like ties, like neckties. And I think both of these stores had very low sales volumes, lots of issues, lots of potential, headaches and problems. And initially, my reaction was, I'm disheartened. I've failed, right? But now I look at it and think, well, that was all just part of the journey. I wouldn't have got to where I am now had I not gone through those initial struggles. And so I look at it now as, how quickly can I make enough mistakes and how fast can I fail so that I get to the next point. I'm failing every day. There's all kinds of things we try in all of our companies now that don't work. And I'm like, okay, we don't call it failing though. We now call it testing. We'll test a new market. we'll test something, test a new ad platform, a new strategy. Does it work? Does it not work? I wouldn't be like, it didn't work. Shut the whole thing down, shut the business down because it didn't work. It's just part of the day-to-day routine now. So I think my mindset has shifted so far beyond being disheartened by failures. I now look at that as like, what's the next challenge? What do I need to try and figure out? So I analyzed those mistakes though. That was what was important. I didn't just keep doing the same thing and say, I failed, so I'll just go and do a slightly different store in a very similar niche. I looked and I realized I was going after the wrong target market for the type of business that I wanted, the lifestyle business, the low maintenance, the high ticket, high profit margins. And I didn't have enough margin. And I was using the wrong marketing channels. I was trying to use Facebook and Instagram ads to drum up interest in products that maybe they were in demand, but people weren't searching for them on those platforms. That's why with the home turf advantage model that we teach, we now use Google because that's where people are searching for the products. So we just get the products in front of them. So yeah, eventually I shifted industries from that and I landed on selling products that were upwards of £300 per item. So with a nice, healthy profit margin on every single sale. And I addressed an audience's need. I looked, well, what are the problems that the audience are facing? What are the market looking for? And how can I create a brand that addresses that? And suddenly things started to take off. We started to see results. We got great feedback, great reviews. We started seeing people purchasing multiple items. And I realized, okay, we've done it now. We've realized like what the mistakes we made before, and we started to grow. We started to see things run smoothly. And because we avoided repeating that same mistake, it reinforced in me the importance of just embracing those former mistakes and making sure that you learn from those failures to keep iterating and keep improving upon what you do. And I do that in all areas of my life now.
That's really interesting, Lewis. And from the outside listening to your story, it's quite clear to me that was pivotal and really helpful in a way that you had those failures. But the difficulty is when you're going through a failure at the time and it's all you can see, it's so easy to like write off and make a broad generalization that this doesn't work. So when I had the similar failures with my initial e-com stores and the low ticket items I was selling, I could have written off e-commerce. I could have written off online business altogether if it didn't work for me straight away and I'd lost money through doing it. If I didn't have an embracing failure kind of mindset and realizing that this was a learning step, then I could have easily got carried away with that and never be where I am today with an online business that's thriving. So we've got to embrace failure. I think that's such a good point, Lewis. So clearly it's vital, learning from failures. Another point that we need to think about as an entrepreneur, and this differs definitely from being an employee, is about value creation. So how has the mindset shift impacted your business in terms of focusing on the value that you create?
Yeah, the temptation when you first go into business for your own or for yourself is to think, I've just got to chase profit. And I just do something that's super low barrier to entry and I'm chasing profit and that's what I'm going to get. But that's negating half the equation, which is the people buying from you, the people providing you with the money that you will use as a business owner. So if you flip it round and ask yourself, what problems are the market facing and how can I increase the value of what I'm offering to best solve their problems? Suddenly you can charge a lot more than your competitors who are not using those strategies. So to put this in context, one example is when I first launched a higher ticket store, so selling products upwards of £300, £400, £500 per item from UK suppliers to UK customers using the home turf advantage model. It was okay, and I was chasing profit, if I'm honest with myself. Looking back now, I was just chasing the number. I was like, as many sales as we can make for as high margin as possible, and we'll be good. Over time, you realize unless you shift your focus to value creation, you're not going to win in the long term. So I started thinking, okay, well, what would customers do here? And I noticed that they were purchasing one item, say, for example, a barbecue, but they were then also purchasing like, the gas refill tank or like the barbecue gloves as well. And so I thought, well, could I bundle these things together? Again, just an example of a similar kind of industry, but could I put those things together and then say, you purchase them all as one and you then get a better deal overall? Or even you just charge the same, but you're just increasing your average order value. So that's an example of adding value to customers by just doing that decision-making process and convenience for them. Another thing we did is we noticed that we were getting a lot of questions from customers who are asking questions like, for example, what type of barbecue grill should I get, or what do I need, or compatibility with gas canisters, or things like that. Again, just using the example, but I thought, well, what if we created a tool that was relevant for our industry, that was the equivalent of doing something like complete this quiz on our website to figure out what type of barbecue is perfect for you. And so you go in and it says, how many times a week do you cook? What type of food do you cook? Do you want to refill your barbecue weekly, monthly? Like these types of questions. And then it could like kind of gamify the process of product selection and then help those customers decide on which product they wanted to purchase. Again, it's added value. It's educating the market. So that was another example. Another thing we did was had our customer support team spend the first few weeks when they joined our company, and we still do this to this day, just learning the industry. I say to them, go and watch videos, go and read other competitors' websites, go and read blogs, like just learn the industry so that by the time you're on the phone with our customers or you're answering emails, you can answer their questions with 100% certainty, use the right terminology, the right words, the right phrases, and that they truly believe that you are experts in that industry. And it doesn't take long to become an expert in an industry. People are often worried that like, I've not been in that industry before. I promise you, if you spend 2 weeks full time just reading and learning and absorbing, you will be an expert in that industry very quickly. So these are the things we did, and we saw market resonance. We saw our audience really appreciated that added value. They bought the bundles, they used the convenience tools that we'd created on our site, and then they purchased, and they appreciated our support because we got great reviews. And so I think over time that shifts into like, well, then people start talking about you through word of mouth. It boosts your organic traffic, your referral traffic. And then of course profits then follow that as a byproduct of the added value that you've provided through doing those things. So for me, the importance of building a business that benefits others now trumps chasing profit, because I know that the latter will follow the former. If you can get that bit right, you don't have to worry about the profit side. As long as you have a good system that's scalable, that works like we do with these stores, then just focus on solving a problem for the customers.
Yeah, this is really useful. I'm taking these tips down for myself, Lewis. So thank you for sharing these tips that you've used to build your e-commerce store. And I think if people take one thing from this whole podcast episode, it would be that the income that you can generate and you'll take from the business is directly proportional to the value that you create for your market. And that's just the way it works. It's the way it works with everything. And the money that you'll earn is directly proportional to the value you create for your customers. So keep that in mind. That's a mindset shift. I don't think we have these discussions enough as employees. It's all about just getting through the 9 to 5 and just doing your job. There's never a real consideration, unless you're the business owner and you're looking at the bottom line, about how you can actually make a difference to your customer's journey and improve their lives through the products that you sell and the experience that they have with you. So just on this point of value creation, the way I view it as well is I'll get down a pen and paper and I'm looking at my market and I'll think about my ideal customer and I'll think about when they're purchasing a product from my store, what would be the absolute pinnacle experience that they could have when buying from my store. So would it be a guide about the product? Would it be free support that we make very obvious they've got 7 days a week from our team? Would it be an accessories guide, the accessories that we'd suggest for those products? Would it be, say you're in the running niche and you're selling running products, would it be a local running guide for where they are, wherever they place that order from? Think about and write this down. It takes some time. How can you provide as much value to your ideal customer as possible? So not just the product that you do as the main product, but what can you bolt on to that as well, so that you're providing the most value possible to that customer? And then what happens is you're no longer in competition with your direct competitors, because you're not competing on price. You're competing on the value that you can provide to your customers. And it'll be clear to your customers that buying from you is going to be head and shoulders above buying from any of your competition. So think about that when you're really thinking about how can you serve your customers as best as possible. So a great point there. Thank you for that, Lewis. And I really enjoyed listening to the ways you do that. So I'm going to take that on board. Now, the next mindset shift that people have to have as an entrepreneur is simply taking complete ownership. So whether that's ownership over their results, over their failures, it's ownership over everything that they do and the inputs and the outputs that they get from their business. So Lewis, talk to me a little bit about how you view ownership and taking ownership of your business.
So I didn't used to view it as an essential until I found out the hard way. It used to be the case where I would think, okay, I don't have to have ownership of all of these bits. Like I can be experts in some, but other bits I'll just kind of leave. But you realize what happens. The bits that you just leave in other people's control are the bits that are your blind spot, right? And you never develop skills around those things. And oftentimes it's because we label ourselves as like, oh, I'm not a numbers guy, or I'm not a graphics design guy. I'm not a website design guy, so I won't deal with that stuff. But you need to have oversight of that when you're starting, because that, when it's your business, you need to at least understand the process, even if you're not the one doing it. So I think, I've talked about this in a previous episode, but the early days of my business, when I lost track of the finances and things started to spiral out of control quite quickly because of the cash flow oversights, we were overspending on marketing campaigns and under allocating money to be set aside for taxes, corporation tax, VAT, things like that. We found ourselves in this horrible position that still gives me chills to think about, where we didn't have enough money in the bank to pay the suppliers what we owed them. I think we were like 20k in debt and just didn't have it. And I was like, how have we ended up here? But looking back now, I realize we ended up here because I didn't take extreme ownership of all areas of the business, including the finances. Even though I'm not the finance guy necessarily, I need to at least understand it. So we've covered this in previous episodes, I know, but I think that's one of the things that when I educated myself on financial management, on cash flow management, on expenses, on setting budgets, making informed decisions, forecasting, things like that, things that I would never have been trained in because I wasn't an accountant. I didn't do those types of trainings. But now that we've turned the business around and I've figured out the things that I need to at least have an eye on and understand, it's really important. And I think looking back on it now, that dark time, that really pivotal moment for me, I'm so grateful for it, because I think, they talk about the concept of fear setting, right? Again, it's another Tim Ferriss kind of concept where you say, if you're going to try and go after something and you're worried about the risk of failure, play out the worst case scenario. What happens in the scenario that you fail? And really go into detail on it. So do it now. If you're at home listening to this, or you're in the car or in the gym or wherever, and you're thinking, I want to launch that business, but I'm worried about X. What is X? Play it out. Write it out in extreme detail and say, okay, I would lose everything. I'd go bankrupt. I would be really unhappy. My friends and family would all laugh at me. These kinds of things that are often the root cause of people's fear. And then write yourself out, and what would I do in that situation? And it's like, okay, well, I'd maybe have to declare bankruptcy. My friends and family probably wouldn't disown me. They'd just be like, oh, it happens in business. And then I'd probably try again and launch a different business, or I'd just go back to a job. It's like, okay, well, now are you okay with that scenario? And if you are, now write out the more likely outcome, right? And then are you okay with that? How does that look? Then you write out actually the best case scenario. Here's what could happen. And when you realize that the upside of the best case scenario far outweighs the potential downside of the worst case scenario, you realize, well, the risk here is not experiencing the upside, because I'm okay with the downside. I've already played it out, and if it happens, it happens. That's one of the biggest lessons I think that I got from, and kind of tying this back to extreme ownership, is like, now I'm okay with the downside because I experienced it and it was horrible. And yes, but I know that if we ever go back there, it's not going to kill me. And I think I had to learn that the hard way. But now if that's what's stopping you and holding you back, try that exercise I just talked about. Rewind the podcast, listen to that again, and actually follow the steps. Because I remember when I did it, it's a game changer. It just shifts your mindset and you think, now nothing's holding me back now.
Really wise words, Lewis. So that's really, really important for people to take on board. And that actual fear setting thing, and I did that before I started my business. And that was something that completely changed my attitude to risk then. And you realize that it's actually far more risky not to start the business, because of the potential downside of not starting a business is actually a lot more scary than the downside of starting a business that fails. So, if you don't start, you'll have 30 years of mediocrity, and you'll never feel like you did what you wanted to do with your life. And that's a lot more scary than starting a business. So such an important point there. I think on the point of extreme ownership, and there is a book on the subject from Jocko Willink, I believe he's an ex-special forces in the US. It's a brilliant book to read, to learn all about taking ownership. I think the point on this is that some people get sort of afraid of taking extreme ownership because they can't blame something else. They can't have an excuse why something didn't work. They've got to take responsibility themselves. So if something doesn't work, it's on them. But instead of you viewing that in a negative light and not being able to hide behind excuses, that's actually completely freeing, that feeling of actually, I'm completely in control of what's happened. So there's nothing external that can cause me to be a failure that I can't control. and suddenly you're in the power position. You don't have to become a failure because of somebody else clicking their fingers and you becoming a failure, or the weather being bad, or the government not being right. And that's such a big mindset shift that I've had, to realize that I'm in complete control, and therefore we can go about and go about achieving the success and learning from the inevitable failures that come our way. So something to definitely think about there, and something that I've gone through a process to get to. So with that said, on extreme ownership, now, Lewis, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. And it's about having a mindset of a growth mindset. So as an entrepreneur, there's this idea of having a growth mindset. So how do you think about the importance of having a growth mindset is to be an entrepreneur?
I absolutely love this one, because it's such a hack, a life hack, if you can gamify this process. Back in the day, I used to get really frustrated when I couldn't do things. I used to find it really difficult and frustrating when, for example, I would be launching like my business. I'd be like, I don't know which platform to use, and I don't know how to get this heading here and this, photo to look like this, and really frustrated. And then the older me would have thrown their hands up in the air and just said, I'm done with it. Forget it. I'll go back to the 9 to 5 if it's that hard, that kind of thing, right? That I get to a certain point and then I just give up if everything goes wrong. Now, I treat it as, if I can adopt the growth mindset, I treat those challenges as learning opportunities. So I remember I used to spend very long evenings, I talked about before, in Cafe Nero with my laptop in London, because that was one of the only places that was open until midnight, I think it was. And I was researching things, I was building, I was growing. And as I was trying to overcome things, there were always technical challenges, because I didn't have the money at the time to go and hire like a team of web developers to help us overcome things, or an ads company to help us run our ads. It was all very much like, I'm doing this or it's not happening. And so I used to go down these rabbit holes on YouTube and try on forums through Google and try and figure out there must be a way of doing this. And I was some of the support desks at these companies, I was like their worst nightmare, because I was always on there can you just talk me through this one more time? I'm just trying to figure out how to link this with this and make it work. But I used to set myself a goal of saying, if I can overcome this frustrating small minor technical obstacle, I'll reward myself. And for me, I remember it was I'm going to let myself go and play a game of FIFA and then go out and buy a coffee, in the morning. If I'm working on something in the early morning, or it'd be I'm just going to put my feet up, watch the football tonight, knowing that I've done it. And that was my reward. And to be fair, I would have probably done that anyway, had it not worked. But it's the gamification process. It's putting the thing that you want as your reward, so that you're like the hamster in the wheel, if I can get to this thing, then I get my, drop of water or whatever. If I do the challenge and overcome it, I can get to the reward at the end of the, the end of the task. And it's now I love it, because I do this all the time. And eventually you don't even really need the reward anymore, because you just love the process of solving problems and overcoming things. And so I'm committed to this even in my personal life. I'm always reading personal development books and listening to business podcasts and getting expert advice and mentorship, and constantly doing that. But yeah, I think it was just that initial bit of overcoming technical challenges by growing my own abilities that made me realize, I don't have to be a tech guy. I just have to have a growth mindset, and realize that if I don't need all the answers, but if I'm willing to go and get the answers, that's all that matters.
I think it was Carol Dweck, and it's in her book that I've read, that first sort of made this idea about a growth mindset popular. And it's all about the difference between having a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. I'm boring people, my girlfriend, all the time by telling her about having a growth mindset, or mentioning this to people that I speak to. But it is such an interesting point after I read that book. Some people, they see the world through a fixed mindset, which means they've got limits on how good they are at something. So when I first failed my first e-commerce business, if I had a fixed mindset around that, I'd view myself as a failure, and that there's nothing I could do to get better. And I'm not very good at running online business, would have been my thought process. But with a growth mindset, which is key as an entrepreneur, you actually realize that you can grow and learn from any failures that you have. So that doesn't define you. That's not a limit. That's not how good you are. That's just how good you are at the specific moment, because you've not had enough time to get good at something. So through the lens of a growth mindset, you know that you can improve on what you've learned and then eventually get to success. So completely agree with you on that, Lewis, and the importance of growth mindset, and also gamifying the approach. And I like the idea of having FIFA games as rewards, which is something in mind that you can aim towards to get through a specific task. Okay, so the next mindset shift is all about being intentional with your time. So living with intention. So Lewis, I'm keen to hear, how do you think that living with intention can help us to achieve our business goals?
Well, I didn't used to have a huge amount of clear, focused intention, and I was always very motivated. I would always know that, hey, I'm driven to succeed. I didn't quite know what success meant or why I was doing it. I just had that innate desire to succeed. And I'm sure many people listening to this now will relate and say, yeah, that's me as well. I have that. But it wasn't until I decided to become intentional about succeeding and setting a very clear goal that I realized that the power of really living with intention and setting clear goals could have. So now I begin the day with like daily goal visualization, or actually I'll do it the evening before. I'll kind of write down what the big goals are for the next day. But then the beginning of the day, I'll start with some daily visualization. And that's not just business goals. That's gratitude for friends, families, experiences, places, like where I've been, where I am now, the business as well, but also affirmations and saying them out loud. I think that's something that I would have never realized. Someone could have told me that rationally, that you need to say these things out loud or write them down. And I would have just said, I'm sure it's fine if you just type them or write them on your phone. But really, there is nothing more powerful than doing that, because when I started to write those specific goals down and would say them, and the affirmations in the set, so just some examples of that, because that might sound a little bit arbitrary unless I put examples around it. Imagine you're saying to yourself, so you're saying these affirmations as if you are already the person that you're trying to become, right? So you're embodying that person already. So you're saying, I am a successful business owner with an amazing team. I love running my business. I'm a great father. I'm a great son. I'm a good role model for the people that I support and help in our program. Like, there are all these things that when you tell yourself those things, then you start to act as a person who believes that. And it's like the opposite way around to how you'd rationally believe it needs to happen. But it's so true. So now I'm focused and motivated, and I know what I'm working towards, and I take the actions that are aligned with the goals that I have, and I start to see real progress from them. And it all comes back to starting out with intention and actually writing out clear, measurable goals. And yeah, I think living with intention transformed my entrepreneurial journey, and it just brought me closer to success.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I've got similar routines to you as well, and making sure you're very clear on your goals at the start of the day. And that means you're intentional with everything you do, and all the actions you take throughout that day is all geared up to achieving the goal that you've set up to achieve that day. And starting off with the visualization and what you've got to be grateful for at the start of every day, and then also the visualization of where you're going, has been huge for me. And also on that point of intention, it's easy today to fall into a trap of living without intention and going on social media or watching TV and watching Netflix. And that's not something you've done intentionally, because after 3 hours of, watching something that you didn't intend on watching, you've just fallen into that, and you never intended to spend that time doing that anyway. So it's so important, if you are going to have some time, and it's fine to take time off and relax and watch a football match. But the way I look at it now is that I decide at the start of the day that I know there's a football match that I want to watch that evening. So I'm going to intentionally watch that match and not fall into it. I know that that's what I'm going to watch. But all the way leading up to that point, I'll be intentional with the achieving the goals that I've set out to achieve in the day as well. So it's always living through that lens of intention. It's been a real game changer for me. Okay, so now we're on to the seventh mindset shift, and potentially one of the most crucial to achieving your goals. And that's all about thinking and acting big. So how do we overcome our fears, Lewis, and limitations so that we can think and act big?
Yeah, I remember being very hesitant about this one when I first started out on the entrepreneurial path that I'm still on today. And I was very worried about what other people would think if I started to think and act big, or bigger than maybe I had been previously, and started to enact these goals and put these affirmations into practice. And I realized the importance of doing so over time. But one of the enablers to do that was surrounding myself with like-minded entrepreneurs, joining supportive communities, and getting around people that really shattered my limiting beliefs. And it was normalizing the process of thinking and acting big. Like, if you're in a room with people and you're playing small, and everybody else in that room is at £100,000 a month, suddenly, if you're not, you're the one that's not normal. Everyone else in that room's normal, right? So then your the baseline level is here, and you're here. You have to work your way up to achieve normal in that scenario. That's the kind of room that I would have tried to get in when I first started, and still do to this day. It's just that obviously the bar keeps getting higher and higher, so you have to keep finding a different room. But it's getting around other people who shatter your limiting beliefs through evidence of them doing what you thought was impossible. And that's one of the big ones. I think for me, it's like, for example, I always thought, if you're, like I said at the start, the business owners that I thought about were stressed. They would have always been in front of their computer all day in an office till like 11 in the evening. Now, because I've seen other people do it and run lifestyle businesses, I'll take a few weeks out to Dubai, or we're going to Mexico for a month soon with the family, and I'll take the laptop and work from there occasionally, but I'll treat that as like a kind of a mini vacation, like a workcation, if you like. And so that is something that I would have historically thought there's no way you could do that and run your own business, surely. Now we regularly do that, and I'm speaking in front of a room of people soon in an event in London in front of hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs, and that's something I love doing. But you have to think big and you have to act big in order to get in those situations. If you constantly downplay what you're doing, then no one's going to ever ask you to do anything like that, or no one's going to invite you into those types of rooms. So I think being part of a large community really helps break through those limitations, because it normalizes it makes it the new baseline level. And it's just embracing that abundance or growth mindset to ensure that you are improving your lifestyle and you're always looking to level up to whatever that next level means for you. And something that I'm really protective over, and I've talked about this in the past, is protecting my own subconscious mind from negative stimuli. So in the morning, I won't put on the news. If I get in the car and the radio's on and it's like the news headlines, I'll just switch it straight off or switch over to Spotify or something. I think if you're allowing your subconscious to get polluted by, like, it's people misinterpret this one, I think, as a lack of empathy or sympathy for tragic global events. I absolutely have empathy and sympathy for them, but if I can't do anything to control them, and it's some terrible event that's happened on the other side of the planet to me, and it's being fed into my subconscious the first thing in the morning when I wake up, what's that doing for my subconscious mind? Of course, I hate the fact that these things are happening, but if I can't do anything about it, is it serving me on my goal of trying to help aspiring entrepreneurs create amazing businesses by just polluting my mind with this like toxic negative energy straight away in the morning? So yeah, I don't watch the news, I don't read the paper, I don't listen to the radio. If anything massive happens, I find out through family and friends, and I usually hear like a condensed version of events that are never quite as bad as they were sensationalized to be in the first place. So that's a big one for me. I think it's making sure that I protect my subconscious mind to allow me to continue to think and act big and not be brought down by what the media and society often want us to be brought down to.
I completely agree. I think it is easy to be influenced from outside events. And it's an ancient Stoic quote, I believe, that says that you should stand guard at the gates of your mind. And that's what you're talking about there, Lewis. And it's about being very careful about what you allow into your mind. And if you're filling your days with browsing social media or picking up from the news, it's easy to pick up on that and start having limiting beliefs that then negatively impact your ability to think big and act big to achieve the big goals that we have. So absolutely fascinating, Lewis. I love hearing about all these different mindset shifts that you've had to go from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. And I hope that we've really helped out with these points from our listeners today. So any final thoughts to share today on today's episode?
Yeah, I think just really to summarize, if you're listening to this and you like the sound of these mindset shifts and you think I'd like to make those things, then I'd encourage you, put them into place today. Even if it's just one of the 7 that we've talked through, just enable it, enact it, start applying it and see what impact it has. And I guarantee it will start to compound, because you'll think, well, I really liked that shift. I'm going to apply the next one. And if you want our help to guide you through actually implementing these step by step, we've baked them into our program. So inside Dropship Unlocked, we guide you through that throughout your entrepreneurial journey. So if you want a step-by-step guide on how to do that, you can head over to dropshipunlocked.com/free to learn more. Just a quick heads up, if you'd like to share your questions, stories, successes, or challenges, you can email us directly at podcast@dropshipunlocked.com. And you never know, we might even feature you on the next podcast episode.
Also, if you want access to today's show notes or any of the resources we've mentioned in the episode today, then head over to dropshipunlocked.com/podcast. We also have a small favour to ask of you. If you enjoyed the show so far, you could take a minute to leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice.
You wouldn't believe how much your reviews help us grow the podcast. We'll even read out some of our favourites on the next episode. So if you want to be featured on the show, please do go ahead and leave us a review today. Thanks so much for your support. We really couldn't do it without you, and we absolutely love hearing what you think of the podcast.
Okay, so we're now into the part of the episode where we take a question from a listener. I love this part of the episode. And remember, you can get your questions in today if you email podcast@dropshipunlock.com, and we'll answer your question in a podcast episode coming up. So that's exactly what Zubin has done. So we have a question from Zubin today, and it's actually a few different questions. So I'll break them up for you, Lewis. His first question is, how do we know that we are entering a niche where the suppliers are going to be friendly to dropshipping and able to work with us with the business model that we want to use?
Yeah, so one of the things that we would do inside week 2 of the Dropship Unlocked program is to actually determine, firstly, the presence of other dropshipping retailers like you who don't have physical premises, they don't have warehouses, they don't have showrooms, and they are dropshipping. Because what that does is it validates that the model works, so that the home turf advantage strategy would work in that industry. The second thing we do is look for suppliers who are supplying into that niche, and we would validate those things. So when you're kind of creating your list of product ideas and niches, because right now you might think, I have no idea what to sell. Don't worry about that. Like, that's part of the research process in week 2. We'd help you select that niche, knowing that you will definitely be able to dropship products in that niche, and that the suppliers will definitely be happy to work with you because you can see that they're already working with other dropshipping retailers in that niche.
Exactly, and that's why the process is set up. So you never go into a niche where you find out after you've set up a store that there's no dropshippers in there. It's always done first before you choose a niche. And then Zubin goes on to ask, so what if a supplier provides a better margin for a retailer that takes stock? Is that a thing? And is there a way of noticing this before we sign with a supplier?
Yeah, so it's difficult to know the margins that another retailer might have with a supplier because they might have been in business for a lot longer. There might be other reasons why they would have a better margin. So I wouldn't get too caught up on that, because sometimes, you might get a slightly worse margin than another retailer who takes a huge container loads worth of stock of that item. And that's understandable, right? The brand want to sell in bulk if they can. That's not our model. But as long as we're able to get like a 30% margin, then we're still in a good place. The thing that I would focus on, and again, this comes back to something that we would have done before you even go into that niche inside week 2 to avoid costly, expensive, time-wasting mistakes, is that we would look for price consistency in that market already. So we have kind of a module that goes through like how we would analyze a specific group of products and determine, is there a huge price fluctuation between the different retailers, and are people selling it at all kinds of prices? Therefore, maybe that's an industry that you don't want to enter into because you don't want to race to the bottom on who can get by with the lowest margin. That's not an industry we want to be in. And so some industries are a lot better at this than others. And obviously we would want to pick the ones that do hold their prices and allow you to maintain a margin as a supplier. So again, hopefully not a dilemma that you'll be faced with, because if you go through everything sequentially as we lay out in week 2 of the program, you won't end up in that position anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lewis. Yes, so now on to the section of the episode where we are going to read out a review that we've had recently from a listener. And this listener is called John. And John has left a very kind review that we'd like to read out to everyone. John has said that he's clearly also actually a member of Dropship Unlocked, the program, as well as listening to the podcast, because he's mentioned in his review about being part of the program as well. So John said, absolutely fantastic program. He can't speak highly enough of the guys at Dropship Unlocked. The methodical training put together is absolutely on the money, and the twice weekly webinars, predominantly run by James, are phenomenal. So I don't think there's been a question that hasn't been answered yet on those twice weekly webinars. And the only question you have to ask yourself is, do you want this to work? Because the team at Dropship Unlocked certainly stick by their side of the deal. So John, thank you so much for that review. It means a lot. I'm really glad that you're pleased with being a member of the program already.
Yeah, thank you, John. And we've seen you around in the community, and we love having people like you in there. So it makes it worth doing for us. So thank you so much for your very kind review. And the best of luck in building your business. Remember, if you want to hear your review read out on the podcast, then leave us a rating and review on the podcast platform that you're using, or a YouTube comment, and we'll make sure to feature you on an upcoming episode soon.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Dropship Unlocked podcast. We hope you found today's episode useful and inspiring.
Remember, if you're ready to take the next step towards creating your own high-ticket dropshipping business, our step-by-step mentorship program can help. Just head to dropshipunlocked.com/free to learn more and get started on your own journey to financial independence.
Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss another episode, and leave us a review if you've enjoyed what you hear today. We love hearing from our listeners, and we'll even read out some reviews on the next episode.
And finally, thanks for choosing to spend your time with us today. We really appreciate you, and we'll be back soon with more valuable insights and tips on high-ticket dropshipping.